Hey guys, welcome back to part two of the first episode of Convince Me. I'm back here with Peter Römgens, professor at Maasricht University of Psychology and Neuroscience. Double whammy there. Before I steel man Mr. Römgens' argument as to why large governments are inefficient as opposed to smaller governments and smaller nations as well, he's going to briefly touch on two more points. And those are the subject of taxes and authority as far as policing and the handling of criminals. And I understand that part of your tenure in the university was based on the study of prisoners and criminals in your justice system. And so that definitely gives you a lot of background to talk about this. I'm really excited to hear what you've got to say. So go on ahead and take us away, Pete.
I'd say I have to give credit where credit's due. So we have a forensic psychology department at my part of the university. I've done some research on this, but that was mainly for my own project at the beginning. But I have to give credit where credit's due, and my colleagues that really have a much more lengthy career in that area deserve most of the credit there, of course.
Okay.
But I'd say if we look at the prison system, we have a special thing in the Netherlands, which is called, well, TBS over here, which stands for the Dutch equivalent of basically mandatory therapy. So the idea is we do have prisons, but we emptied a lot of them. And surprisingly, I don't know if the concept of an escape room is really something American. Does it sound like anything you recognize, or?
Yeah, they're blowing up, not literally, but they're definitely appearing everywhere where you solve puzzles to get out and whatnot.
And then the funny part is we've turned some prisons into escape rooms where people are either acting as prisoners, they're acting as the guards, they're acting as the wardens, and it's your job to get out.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
No, my dad is fascinated with them, so I'm gonna have to tell him that we're gonna have to take him to the Netherlands just to visit one of your prisons turned escape.
I'd say Google prison escape Rotterdam, because I know they did it in Rotterdam. I think they also moved to a new building to try out something new.
Mm-hmm.
And since there are a few prisons that are empty, they have a few spaces to go.
Wow.
So yeah, that's how far we've gotten with some of our prisons.
A testament to how well your prison reform system is in your nation. I do have a question though. Are you guys sensing any concerns as far as your immigration? Having that change?
The immigration part is heavy everywhere, and I think even in America they know about the refugee crisis over here. Syria is a big thing, of course. We've had roughly half the Middle East come here at some point. But I'd say if you look at our refugee thing, I think I already said it in the first part, but the idea is that we are known as a country that treats their people quite well relatively. So when we decide that someone has the right to stay and should really be welcomed, and we're not that bad at that, I think, then we do try to make sure that they have some housing, that they have. Yeah, so the basic income, I think it's a welfare idea, but I think it's somewhere close to €1,000. And if you really don't have a job, they try to get you one. They try to help you along with that. And yeah, I'm not going to say that we're always successful at that, because we aren't. Nothing is 100% successful.
But a lot of that is paid for. A lot of that is paid for by your tax system, right?
Yeah, it really is. Almost all of it.
If you could, did you also want to go into that as well, as far as the benefits of a smaller nation?
Yeah, I think if you look at the tax thing, a lot of people, and I see Americans all over Facebook because, well, it's easy access. But you see a lot of countries complaining about the tax system, so that they have to hand in, let's say, half their paycheck. I don't know how much it is over there. Here it's roughly a third, I think, for most people. And then complaining about the fact that they have to hand that in to the government to pay their salary. And I think a lot of the time my TV is acting up, but we'll take care of it. I think a lot of the time they're forgetting that a lot of the services that you get as a group and that you already decided on, this is what we all need and want, that they should be taken care of by tax money. That's the idea. A small thing, a small part of it should go to salaries because those people are not doing it for nothing. And running a country can be a bit of a stressful job. So yeah,
you say a small part.
Yeah,
small part, not a large part.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I think we have a maximum now. It's called the Balkan norm after one of our ex-presidents. But I think it's about 125,000 euros a year. It's close to that. And the idea is that everyone working in a government-related institute should earn that as a maximum. So our prime minister, it's
a year,
125,000 a year. I think
that's it.
I think that's what it is. Wow. And if you're government related, so if you're working off tax money and you're somewhere at the top, that should be the max. So we're not talking about banks and stuff like that, but we are talking about health institutes that are completely government related.
So do you guys have to deal with like lobbyists and donors and stuff to your politicians? Because I mean, people
donors to politicians, definitely not. No,
I mean,
people it probably happens, but
money on the campaign trail. You know, before they even get the seat, they're already making money from donors.
And yeah, I think that's not here. That doesn't happen that much over here, at least not as far as we know. Let's keep it smart. But I think the idea is that there probably are some people that are paying them for something, and we'd never find out. But the idea, as much as in America, where we all hear about that and they're being sponsored for their campaign, doesn't happen over here. Our parties have members, they pay contribution, and they get volunteer. They do get volunteer contributions from their members and stuff like that. But it's not a thing as it is in America. So here, they run a campaign, they get some money for it because they're a big party and they have a lot of members. They do pay a yearly thing, but that's mostly supposed to be it. And then, they just go on a lot of interviews and they just try to get as many votes as they can. But we also don't have the let's say the electoral vote system that you have. So you just vote once and that's it. If 50% of the country or the voters that actually go vote for, let's say the random, the VVD, it's a party over here, then they get 50% of the seats in the actual room. That's the idea, and that's a straightforward thing.
So do you guys separate it into districts as far as like the voting system?
We have provinces, but as far as the voting system goes, no, it's all gathered up in one pile, and then the percentage of that complete thing, that's what matters. So if one of the parties gets 50%, they get 50% of the room. They get 10%, they get 10.
So political parties, in a sense, you guys don't have to deal with the whole states versus, actual federal government or, like Supreme Court, Senate, Congress, and all that stuff. You guys just have a parliament or something?
Yeah, we have, what we call it's so bad if you directly translate that.
Translate it, right? What do you call it in what language does
Dutch.
Dutch, okay, all right.
So the worst translation ever is literally second room and first room. So the idea is that...
What is the word?
Kamer, Tweede Kamer, Eerste Kamer. And that's literally first chamber, second chamber.
Okay.
So the idea is that our direct government is in the second chamber, and now I'm going to have to remember, oh God, what they taught me back then. And then there's, if you really want to change something big, the first chamber basically has to go above that and also vote. And that's basically it. We have a king, but he is of almost no use.
In the same sense that the English monarchy is simply a title or a figurehead.
Yeah, he's really good at making us look good. So he has a very, very attractive wife, and they have cute kids, and they make a pretty picture.
So they're the poster children for the nation.
Yeah, and they're really good at that. So most of us seem to like them. They're pretty popular. They do a good job. They show up at normal places. It's not like they have a massive round of security. Kids can hand them pictures and stuff like that. So it's not that distant, but they're more for a PR thing and to make us look good and to represent us, as it is actual ruling or being part of the government.
Okay, now, last, unless you can think of any other aspects with which you feel that small governments and small nations are superior to the larger ones. As far as the media goes, can you maybe touch on the media presence? Because I've noticed historically and in the present day, and I'm already trying to play devil's advocate, they the smaller a nation is, the more centralized a government is, the more controlled the media is, and the less whistleblowing or attention. You just briefly mentioned if there was lobbying going on, you wouldn't hear about it. So can you maybe expand on that further and maybe touch on that?
Yeah, we have a couple of big companies here, which are a pretty good example. Shell is probably widely known from the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's our old company. The idea is that we have heard stories, and it's getting bigger and bigger since a year, I think. And the idea is that we do know that they sometimes try to walk in and get a meeting and then say, well, if this doesn't happen, we move the country out of the Netherlands and go sit somewhere else. It's a massive thing here because we have a lot of talk shows where basically everyone gets to go there and give their opinion if they just email that they want to be over there and they have a strong opinion.
So
but it's also that
voice a lot in the media.
Yeah, and if you look at social media, a lot of the news agencies, probably just like every single country out there, have a lot of Facebook contact. You see a lot of reactions, but you also see reactions to what's happening in there. So if you see a very strong reaction from the people to something, it seems to actually have an effect on what happens after. Plus, the contact to a smaller government is easier than probably it is for you guys to just walk up to someone and walk up to Washington, go in and talk to someone from the actual government. I'm thinking that's a lot harder over there. Not even just because of the distance, but
yeah, but just simply the amount of red tape and people you have to go up through the chain of command. Yeah, no, I can totally see that. All right, so it's Steelman time.
Go for it.
Guys, this is the part of the show where I try and, to my best, restate the topic, and we'll see how well I was paying attention. And all right, so as far as societal issues that we are experiencing, humans in general have to face them one way or another, and you are of the opinion that a smaller government and a more condensed population, well, not necessarily a more condensed, but generally a smaller population, provides more efficient management in virtually every facet, as far as anything from natural disasters to policing. And then you also mentioned happiness being a variable in a nation, which is definitely a foreign concept over here in the States. But you mentioned that as being slightly more important than a nation's GDP. And I would also add that it might also contribute to a nation's GDP, and that by making certain sacrifices in the short term to a nation's GDP, one might see a more progressive increase over time. Here I am steel manning you to the max here. But you basically have a formula that small nations equal happier nations, and larger nations equal less control and more oversight as far as things slipping through the cracks, like corruption, criminality, or just neglect or negligence. And in the subject of taxes, you mentioned that a low population was better than a large population, because you would have more transparency and more efficiency. You would have a better overview of where your taxes are going. less politicians, less lobbying, so you know actually where your taxes are going. That's something that we have a huge problem with in the United States. I personally have complained about that several times. I don't know if on other episodes, but I'm sure I'm going to again in the future, on future episodes. So your premise is that the purpose of a nation is to unite it based on its systems of beliefs, norms, and values. It also is there to manage the general fund, because humans as a society need to contribute to the society that they live in. This is basic, just humanity. Everybody knows that. And then also the purpose of government is to make hard decisions, to defend its population, and then also to provide a face of leadership and diplomacy. You mentioned that your king is more of a concierge than anything, which, I mean, hey, there's nothing wrong with that, especially if you get to wear a crown. And then also you mentioned that the salaries of your politicians were capped, which to me sounds absolutely wonderful. I don't necessarily know, is that the case in most nations that are small?
I'm actually not that sure. I tried to find out, but well, not extremely surprising. Finding out what people earn in other countries as far as the government goes is a hard thing to track.
Right.
But as far as I know, they have similar systems around us. I'm not sure about the numbers, but I don't think it's an unlimited as far as you get sponsored. And if people don't mind, then you can just grow and grow and grow. I think that's really just not just us here.
Okay.
But I'm not sure about Switzerland, Iceland, and all that.
Okay. So, how did I do? Was there anything that I missed out on? Is there anything that you feel I misrepresented in any way, shape, or form?
That sounded good to me. Let's see what you can do.
Okay. All right. So, devil's advocate. Now I have maybe call this nitpicky, but I have a couple stipulations. Because as much as I am not a fan of America's current politically tainted, money tainted system, inherently it is far more profitable to be a capitalistic democratic society, and to be more focused on expansion, because a rising ship or a rising tide raises all ships, no matter how leaky or no matter how large. So in a sense, I guess let's just start with the taxes. In the United States, our entire revolution was based around the premise that we did not like the fact that we were taxed for certain things, and we demanded to have representation, and then now we have representation through elections.
Yeah.
I know, right? So I sense that it is merely the decision of European nations as a result of the trauma that they experienced during World War II, World War One, during the Cold War, with the threat of communism, that really solidified their values of democracy, of representation, of certain freedoms being respected. And I just, as far as history goes, as far as anything else goes, I can just think Syria, North Korea, let's think, Egypt, Lebanon. I mean, I'm trying not to just go easy and say most of the countries in Africa and the Middle East, but these are all small nations that are ruled by a monarchy, whose people are suffering on an insane level. So as far as small governments go, your nation and my nation, we both have at least some semblance. Yours is probably more honest of a semblance of where our taxes are going. And the thing is, we vote for representatives. You know, we have our congressmen, and they say they're going to, you know, change the system, and then suddenly we have a $600 billion military budget this year. So clearly this isn't working properly. So it's interesting to see how your small government is somehow able to maintain its integrity towards the people, especially since you briefly mentioned companies like Shell coming in and saying, hey, we don't like what's going on here. We're not profiting. So if we're not profiting, then you're not going to profit as a nation. Submit to our demands. I don't understand how your government is able to maintain its integrity in the face of that. How do you see that playing out?
I'd say, first of all, I'd have to be honest about this. The whole Shell thing, of course, they never really admitted all of this. So we do have some news outlets that let this come out, and that's Shell and something called Unilever, which is about the same size, I'd say. They own a lot of companies in the food business. That they would have lobbied, let's say, for certain things that would benefit them. And in the end, stuff like, well, how many jobs are we supplying the country, that kind of thing. But I'd say the governmental thing, they have given into some things, but they weren't that bad. And let's say if you're looking at the last year, our salaries have gone up. I have another raise apparently coming in February. So we're doing okay at this point. And that's all just nationwide stuff.
But in that same sense, and I don't want to cut you off here, but before you get too, you know, hyped up about how much a corporation's decisions can profit you as a nation, I mean, what if they find you know, a vein of gold or a vein of gold or a vein of lithium underneath one of your national monuments, and that same corporation, or they find a bunch of biogas that Shell can harvest, and
they found that.
Okay,
I think they have some places where they did find it, and it was under national reserves. It was in a part of the country, well, the top part, for everyone that's not familiar with our topography, the northeast part had some trouble with that. But when they started drilling the way that they did, even when it was a bit into the ocean, they caused so much trouble that in the end we just said no, and we closed it off, and they didn't have access to it anymore.
Okay. So
it's pretty cut and clear here.
That sounds awesome. I wish that we could just do that here. But okay, so I guess your government is, again, more concerned with happiness than with profit. But that can't be like to a 100% degree. I mean, they still have the company's presence there, and I'm just wondering, like, I mean, you're sitting on a time bomb here. It's just a matter of time, in my opinion. Eventually, the wrong politicians are going to get voted for. They're going to get voted in because, you know, they talk a good game, the same way that happens in every other, you know, free society. And eventually somebody's going to give ground. And I know I'm talking ifs here to play devil's advocate, and that's poor rhetoric, but let's just talk hypothetically here for a second and say, what if, how do you foresee a small government, you know, not being able to, you know, stand up and say no to these powerful corporations? What if Shell was to cut the Netherlands out of the game, which, again, an American company doing that would basically be an economic act of war, and I don't see that happening anytime in the nearest ever. But, you know, we're in hypothetical land. So how do you see the Netherlands responding to that, being such you know, a mountainous region with, you know, I mean, you guys aren't exporting Prada bags or anything.
Not really, no. I'd say if you look at countries like Shell, I'm not clear on the exact numbers that they bring in every year, but I do know they cause a lot of employment, of course, and they do bring in a fair amount of money for the tax services, let's say. But as far as this has happened so far, they still know that the government, however long they've been there, it's for 4 years, just like with you guys, as far as I know. But it's really, really easy to get voted out, because the second your voters who just voted for you last time decide that you just screwed them over, you're going to lose them. And it's happened quite a few times that they didn't make it to the full 4 years. So it is relatively easy to break them up. So if they find out that the part of the government that is actually in control of the regulations and all that, and let's try to put it easy, we have a set of ministers and a prime minister that are the main government at any point. But the rest of that second chamber, as I roughly translated it, which every Dutch person is allowed to screw me on, the idea is that they are constantly debating with them over problems that one of them might have. They have to go into that, and it's live on TV. So the idea that if you go into something or you refuse to give information about something, you are a suspect right away. And the idea is people will go on social media so fast, and all they have to do over here, which has happened more than we'd like, is for one of those people in the 150 in that second chamber to basically give a notion of what's it called in English? Basically, them saying that they don't trust the government anymore. And I forgot the English translation.
Saying it to the media.
No, in the actual government. So if they, there is an English word for that. But at some point, it's just an official move against the government. That, not even. It's basically the official move of the rest of the government saying we don't trust the ones that are actually at the top at the moment. And the second that happens, a lot of the time they just have to go back and vote again and make a new government, or change immediately and say, well,
impeachment.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was it.
Okay.
And it's happened quite a few times, and because our system is so straightforward with the voting, it is extremely easy to lose your position.
Yeah, do you mind if I ask? Because we require 60% of the House to vote yes on impeachment before it can even go to the Senate, and then it has to pass through the Senate, like any other law or proposition. But we have to have a majority, and you just said just one person. That was it.
Yeah, I know it's every Tuesday, but I know it's more often than that. But every Tuesday, I know there's some channel on TV that you can watch it live on, or you can even go sit in the actual room where they have the discussions and the debates. But if one of those people that is voted into one of those 150 seats steps forward and says, well, as a party usually, it's a motion of distrust, literally translated. And as soon as they do that, then a shitstorm basically starts. And either you can explain what you did wrong and why people actually did that, and they don't take it lightly. Before that, it's usually already in talk shows that they have a problem with them. And if it doesn't get solved, they go that far.
So the media does play a huge political presence in this, in your nation. Has that always been the case, or just with the advent of the internet and social media?
No, as far as I know, we've always had stuff like talk shows where politicians end up talking about stuff that's their way to get to the people, because, well, let's be honest, who reads a governmental website nowadays? People like me that are very interested, they will. But the common people, okay, sorry for calling you that. But most people will probably not go that far and check that website every day or check the channel every Tuesday.
Right.
So they just go on talk shows. They talk about stuff like that. They talk about what's been going on. They get asked questions. And nowadays with Twitter, Facebook, and everything like that, people are responding second by second. So they just give you a hashtag. And if you have something to bitch about to this candidate or to the prime minister, this is your hashtag today. And then they just read them out loud, or they show them on the air, and everyone can look them back.
So through social media, the average citizen has a direct line of communication with their representatives at that time.
I could go to The Hague tomorrow, walk in there, and I've had tours in there as a kid with high schools, You might not get directly into the lower part of the debate room where they actually sit, but there's a room up there, basically the stands or the balcony, let's say, where
Right.
you can just go in, sit down, and listen to what they're doing at that point.
Yeah, but
So
I mean, like, you can't just stand up and say, "Well, I have a a, a, a grievance I need addressed by the House." Can't just do that, right?
at that moment, they don't prefer it. But let's say the idea is I had an issue with the party that I voted for last time because they're slowly starting to do things that I don't agree with. They
Okay.
even have they even have a Facebook page. I just sent them a message there because it was my quickest way. And I got an email with a form that I could fill in. What do I want to talk about? And would I be willing to come over there and have a conversation about that? And then the members of that party that should be there actually show up. And then the
Wow.
idea is they're not that far away. And our prime minister is not like Trump. It's not that hard to get to him. If you know where he shops, you just wait at this supermarket. It's that easy.
That sounds dangerous, though.
Yeah, we have some politicians that get shot. So yeah,
Oh my God.
it happens everywhere.
The off
It,
way
ha-
that you just said that.
it happens everywhere, and I'm guessing a lot
Politicians.
of Americans know Wilders, Geert Wilders.
I'm sorry?
I think a lot of Americans even know Geert Wilders. Are he's the one with the bleached blonde hair, styled back, and
Okay.
with a lot of hair gel.
Yeah.
And he's seen. Some people see him as the next Adolf Hitler, which he's not. But he has some strong attitudes towards refugees, for example, which is his big point. But he has some protection issues. Yeah, he's had some threats. And I think the last time they actually killed a politician was about 15 years ago. So, yeah.
So, I mean, how do they not? How does a politician die and a nation not double its police budget the next year? That doesn't
He
make any
had, let's say, he was a really good politician. His name was Pim Fortuyn. If you Google him, you'll get all the specifics.
Okay.
He had a strong attitude. So he had a big mouth, a strong attitude, and he said what, technically speaking, he said a lot of stuff that needed to be said. And that was 15 years ago. And someone just walked up to him. I think it was the media park, as far as I remember. Literally just walked up to him and stabbed him, as far as I know.
That actually happened to a politician, I think, in Venezuela.
I heard something like that. Yeah,
Like a week ago.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but
It's not a common thing here. It's just not that common. We don't have weapons lying around everywhere, so getting a gun is extremely hard here. And getting away with getting one close to someone like that is a little bit harder.
it
Plus,
definitely has to be premeditated.
yeah, and police response is pretty good over here, and there's cameras everywhere. At least some that you can use in those areas. And he was stabbed in the freaking media park. If there's cameras anywhere, it's over there. That's where
Yeah.
most of our TV stations are, radio stations. So
Well, I'm hesitant to take this line because I'm not. I don't hate Muslims. I
he
do.
wasn't.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm not saying he was, but um, the suicide bombing community is almost exclusively Muslim, and I will say it is exclusively religious. I have no problem saying that.
Neither do I.
So in that sense, I mean, if a guy can get stabbed, um, what's to say that? And I'm purely taking this line for the enjoyment of my conservative, rather Republican family members who are just gonna their rocks are gonna get off hearing me say this. With your flood of immigration, your openness in your open borders, and the laxity of security in your nation. I mean, yes, that's great that you've got a great police response time. That's great that you've got cameras everywhere. But there's nothing really. It seems like you guys don't really have a very efficient preventative process, and you just trust that people are going to use the many lines of vocalization. Now, I will give you guys, like you said, credit where credit is due. you guys have a far more efficient line of communication. You guys have a far more effective method of voicing one's grievances and having them legitimately addressed. And that's something that I can value and appreciate that I wish we had in the United States. And I will somewhat concede that that probably does have a lot to do with size. But at the same time, I mean, aren't you guys, I mean, it seems like the Netherlands is just begging for a radical to come in and you know, just terrorist attacks to start happening. I mean,
we've had people give it a shot, so we know that there are people that were, let's say, just arrested, taken care of before it actually happened. But somehow, and I know we have, every country nowadays hopefully has a cybersecurity issue. So our police department is really good at that. We have quite a good intelligence community. So far they've been able to find people that were trying stuff like that before it actually happened, because we have never, and I'm hoping this still goes in 10 years, but we've never had an actual bombing in the Netherlands in this category, as far as I know.
Let's find some wood.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, no,
I know it happened in Brussels. That was a big thing, and Brussels is not that far away.
And
but
then the Charlie Hebdo attacks, that was
France.
That was
Massive.
just over a comic. So in that sense, I mean, let's say they don't do anything radical. Let's say there isn't any bombings or shootings or stabbings. Let's say that, and this is the tack that that my dad unfortunately uses, and he says that by allowing so much immigration to come in, it's going to affect the population, and within a decade, the vote will change. So let me not speak in a sense of just blanketing Islam. But let's just say, I don't know, you get a bunch of people from our Bible Belt who are Southern Baptists, who are just sick and tired of America, who are just like, okay, well, we're going to go to the Netherlands because they have it great there. And suddenly a quarter of your population is Southern Baptists from Texas, Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi. I wouldn't wish that on you for the world.
Thank you.
Say it happens. We've opened the door back into hypothetical land. Let's say that they become voting citizens, and they are all militantly against homosexuality. Now, in your safe society full of cameras and full of intelligence and full of cybersecurity, I'm changing the subject for which I'm arguing now. I feel like you defended that pretty well, but I'm going to talk about the authoritarianism that I'm kind of picking up here with your defense of that last point. You mentioned cybersecurity cameras, and you guys have some preventative measures that I guess the normal citizens don't know about, because you guys can make arrests based on what you see. Let's say it becomes common law through the democratic process of your nation to make homosexuality illegal. All of a sudden, that camera system, all of a sudden that cybersecurity system becomes a very immoral and unethical thing. I don't know if you agree with this statement. I forget who it was that said it. I'm sure several people have said it. But there's a difference between illegal and immoral. And sometimes some things that are very immoral can be illegal, and sometimes things that are very moral, can be considered frowned upon. So in that sense, like I said, we're back in hypothetical land. How tenable do you see that hypothetical becoming reality potentially? What firewalls do you guys have set up to prevent that, and how would you guys combat that sort of situation if it were to occur?
I think I'm actually quite safe with saying this, but we have never really had a big issue with homosexuality. Okay, it used to be a lot bigger than it is now, of course, a lot more conservative, a lot more religion actually in the country, which has gone down and down and down. And from what I hear now, and my grandmother is heavily religious, so sorry for this, grandma. But
So is mine.
yeah, exactly. From what I hear from her, that there's a very common thing happening that a lot of preachers or a lot of pastors are now covering 3, 4, 5 churches because just not a need of them, a need for them. So stuff like that doesn't really heavily affect us, and we try to keep that away from our government as much and as fast as we can.
Right. Well, I use homosexuality as a way of not, tossing the easy one of Sharia law,
Yeah.
So
I'd say homosexuality and the Sharia thing will never happen. We've had a party that tried. So, well, they'll never admit to that. But we have a party called Denk, which is Dutch for think, and all they are is a party that wants to give a platform to mostly Turkish people, it seems. But the idea is that they have a platform. They say for foreign citizens that are actually Dutch sometimes, but just have a different background. And they want to represent them more because they don't think they are being represented in the way they should. We keep them from doing things that for them might be a religious thing, but you can do as many religious things as you want over here, but as soon as you break our common ground laws, not happening.
Right, but there was a time, and I'm sorry to cut you off again, but there was a time you just mentioned religion used to be a huge thing. Homosexuality used to be a huge thing in your nation. I assume that all happened within 100 years, within one generation. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So I see this hypothetical being potentially more than just a hypothetical. I mean, within our lifetime, the entire belief system of a nation might change while the practices of a nation, and I mean this in terms of its cybersecurity and camera policy, it could
become dangerous.
It could become the T-Rex gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then eventually it turns around and realizes there's a snack behind it.
Yeah.
So I'm really having trouble with your defense here. It happened to religion. What's to say religion can't happen to reason? In the same sense, like just through the process of you let enough immigrants come in and they have a belief system, and then just through population vote, they change the policy of a nation, and it doesn't happen overnight. It happens within the span of 20 or 30 years, but it does happen.
Yeah.
So what firewalls and how would you guys handle it if it were to happen without?
I'd say if you're looking at the Dutch population specifically, and what happened and why it happened and what else happened to, let's say, the voting public in that same period, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and this is not, I don't have the actual numbers on this, but I do know that education was not a good thing 100 years ago. My grandma is super intelligent. I tested her now that I became a psychologist. So she is massively intelligent, but never got the opportunity because back then it wasn't as normal, especially for women. If you look at it now,
two different things.
Yeah, but I think if you look at that and how much logic has come into when we change something massive, just like that kind of a regulation, how much logic comes in here and how little effect something like religion seems to have on changing our rules and regulations now. And the whole idea is that when someone tries something like that, because we have a few Christian parties in the government, I think they have, out of 150 seats, they have about 6. So that's the size of our government's knack with religion. But actually mixing up religion and religious reasons for doing something, we have one. And it's basically, if you want to do something for your religion and it's not going against any major rules, then you can do whatever you want. Just don't bother anyone else. And if it goes against some of the other rules, it's not happening.
Do religions still receive tax subsidies from the government in the Netherlands?
I don't think they have I'm not quite sure.
Like
I
they
don't
don't
think
have to pay
it's a
taxes
lot less than it used to
charity.
be because they're stopping. They don't have the money anymore, so they're basically combining churches. But it's not as much as far as I know. And I've lived across from a few pastors, and we lived across the church where they tried to get me to become religious.
Mhm.
It took them 14 years, and it failed. Uh, but the idea is that I talked to them and I know a little bit about how that works and what they get, and they were not rich by any standard whatsoever.
Right.
The idea is that they were, from what I got and from what I saw to them, and they were pretty open and honest. They were low class, maybe beginning middle class,
Okay.
um, and that was basically it. They had a house that they could stay there, they could do their thing, but it wasn't like they could easily just drive an expensive car or whatever like that.
Sounds like they were
Um,
actually living the doctrine.
yeah, that's kind of close to that. Yeah, and you will rarely see a pastor or a preacher in, let's say, a very expensive car or a really big house, unless someone else in the household is also doing something.
Mm.
And I'm not quite sure because, again, I'm not that religious, but I'm thinking there's a difference between the preacher because they are allowed to have wives and pastors or not, something like that, depending on the
Well, the
church.
preachers and pastors are the same thing, but priests, on the other hand, are part of Catholicism, as far as I'm aware, and they are not allowed to marry, or were not allowed to marry.
Yeah.
But I think the Catholic Church changed its stance on that. I will say, as far as our nation, the founding fathers, who were deists and not theists, and I think were honestly too publicly pressured into, you know, retaining their deism, because they didn't have great minds like, Sam Harris or Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins or Dennett, any of, those four, um, to sort of stand up and say, this is what evidence. And I honestly like to consider myself a deist as well, and for reasons that we can get into it at another episode. But the arrangement, that the founding fathers made with religions was, in a sense, you guys don't have to pay taxes, but the compromise is you guys do not get a voice, and we will not support you. And so instead of, you guys get a free pass, instead of having to contribute to society, we're going to label you as a charity. And so thereby you get no voice in Congress, you get no representation, and also we leave you alone and you're free to do whatever you want to do. I mean, is that sort of the way that the cookie crumbles over there, or
It
is it
sounds
different
very
than that?
similar. Although my one question would be your last point about we'll leave you alone and you're free to do what you want. I'm guessing there's a limit to that there.
Oh, totally. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah. Well,
yeah,
I would say that there isn't. Given, I don't know if you read in the news, but in New York and then also in New Jersey, and I think it's just trickling down the East Coast. There was a web page or a hotline or some sort of report process that allowed people to anonymously, um, reveal their experiences that they had suffered at the hands of priests,
yeah.
the Catholic Church. And within like 3 weeks, something like 1,000 people had come in and talked about 300 different priests, many total strangers who had similar stories about the same priest.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would, in a sense, as ashamed as I am to say it, yeah, our government does give the church a get out of jail free card, literally, um, as part of the compromise, of it not interfering in our politics. And we're clearly reaping the benefits given our current glorious Führer and his VP. But that's that's my government, not
Yeah.
yours. So as far as getting back to me playing devil's advocate here, um, I will say that more variables do cause a higher margin of error, but I'm really still stuck on this authoritarianism thing. I understand that you guys' democratic process is from what I'm hearing, your only firewall, and that's it.
Is that safe to say?
And with firewall, you're talking about defenses against
Corruption.
Yeah. I'd say if you're looking at corruption, we have had a few people that, well, I think two things might make this more clear. So we've had a few people that were blamed with corruption, and it's still not that clear, but it was suspicious enough for them to get thrown out, technically. And there's a nicer term for that, but who cares?
Let me interrupt and ask: do you guys have an inquisitorial justice system, or a more American innocent until proven guilty, or guilty and declared guilty, and then it's necessary to prove your own innocence?
It is innocent until proven guilty.
Okay.
Yeah, but the idea is, if you're in the government, you're a role model, you're on top of everything, you should be, let's say, morally kind of clean, and we're reasonable there, so no one's an angel, or at least not complete. But the idea is, if there is a suspicion that you did something or were responsible for the people who did something that was not up to, well, let's say our standards, then you are out pretty fast here. And then they remove one person, put someone new back in, and if it's the entire government that they're doubting on, or whether they can get along with the groups that are actually in the government, because it's a mix of different parties always. As soon as those parties stop getting along with each other in the way that they should, it also just disbands and we get new votes.
So you guys have a very, very efficient recycling system, and you would say that's
best description ever. Yeah.
And you would say that is directly a result of your small governments.
I'm not quite sure if it's directly a result of small government, but the voting system keeps it easy for us. It's simpler. We don't need the big hassle. And if you look at, we literally had a TV show back then a few years ago that was called Over the Balk, which is Dutch for how much money are we wasting on shit that we shouldn't be paying for? And they basically went into the government, started looking at the finances, and started to look where stuff is going, where's the money being spent. And then you would get videos of, let's say, a municipality taking care of a crosswalk, and then putting some traffic lights there, and then they took them away like 2 weeks later, and then they put them back a month later, and then we were paying for all that shit. And they went from stuff like that to the bigger issues where they found out that, let's say we had, what's a big one? We had some people that said they had a good way to prevent bullying, for example, and they started looking at the costs for that. And we now had the exact same thing over again a few years ago. But back then we had the same thing. They looked at that and they said, how much money did we actually pay for that? And is it actually working in the end? And could we have kind of seen that before, that it wasn't going to work out? And then they just basically opened up a cesspool of tax money being spent on places where we could have really been more, let's say, efficient, to keep it nice, because maybe some Dutch people will be watching. But then the idea is that was the idea of the program. We're that open in the end, so there is access to almost everything. And if something like that happens, and if weird things start to happen and money disappears somewhere, then there's, let's say, the government, second chamber is 150 seats. About, I'd say in the end, 20, 30 of them are actually in the top government. So they're the actual, we call them ministers, but you have a different word. Not the senators, but the people actually in charge of the whole thing. Yeah, probably it's the same thing. And that's a small portion of them. The other ones are constantly looking for a reason to, well, basically up their chances at the next time. So they spend 4 years constantly debating with them every week, and most of that is public, about the issues that they think should be addressed, and they're constantly there. They work from the same building and in the same room mostly. So the idea is they pick up on stuff that shouldn't be there, reactions that don't seem to go off very well, and they can just walk up at any general debate, which is live television, and just say, well, we found this out. What's your response to this? Right. And then the other guy is actually right there and actually has to come up and give an answer and say, well, either I'm going to look into it, and then there's a massive thing where they tell you the answer is going to come here and here. Watch this.
Right.
And again, it's a live event.
And
So if you
there's
do something wrong,
accountability in a sense.
oh yeah, transparency and accountability, I think that's much larger, but also much easier looking at a country like the Netherlands.
Yeah, I mean, I can't.
I'm sorry.
I can't disagree with you in that. I would just say that the value of that, because I don't know. Call me American, because I am. But I value privacy and freedom.
Yeah.
You know, in this country, I believe that a gay couple should be able to grow their marijuana and get married and keep as many guns as they want, as long as they aren't trying to fornicate with other people who don't want it. But that falls under the definition of rape, and I would expect even a straight person to not do that. I would expect them to not be passing out joints in their next to their local elementary school, which is the same that I would expect of a straight person. And you know, I just don't go shoot up people. And okay, so you guys, you said that you don't have certain freedoms with weapons, as in only certain citizens are required or are able to pass the extreme vetting process. Could maybe go into that a little bit?
Oh
And
yeah.
does that have to do directly with the size and the policy of your government?
Well, as soon as I said yes to doing this kind of a thing with an American, I was kind of expecting this question. But the idea is that if you look at our gun policies, it is a no-go. Um, the public can have certain weapons if they're in a gun club, but that's not like let's say bows and arrows are very common. Hunting rifles are quite common.
Right.
And I can walk up there and get that done now, but it's in that club. You take that gun home, load it, you take it out on the street, you're done. That's just the police can come up, take you, and just, yeah.
Let me paint a little bit of a picture for you, because this is a picture that my dad, the same one that talked about the immigrants, painted for me. He, as a 16 to 18-year-old high schooler in his town in Texas, he'd get up early in the morning during dove hunting season, deer hunting season, and he'd spend the first 3-4 hours before school hunting, and he would drive his pickup truck with the rifles on the gun mount in the back, and whatever he caught in the cooler of his truck, and he'd just pull up to the high school parking lot, park in the parking lot, and have his shotgun just on his gun rack on his truck, just where anybody could grab it. And that it sounds like an exaggeration, full disclosure, but in a sense, that's what we think of when we think of somebody carrying a gun around. In the States, those of us who respect gun laws, those of us who respect gun safety, those of us who know the purpose of a gun, which is to provide for oneself or to defend oneself or one's family. I'm of the opinion that the only time a gun should leave the house is if you're taking it to go hunting for meat, and you have a need to hunt for meat. If that's not something that you know how to do, if you're just doing it recreationally, if you're just trophy hunting, you don't need to be doing that. But what you kill, you need to consume. That's my opinion. And then the only time that you should use a gun on another human being is if they are literally breaking into your house and attempting to hurt you. Those are the only two circumstances in which I can find having a gun, owning a gun, to be appropriate. But the thing is, we don't have an efficient vetting system, and that allows bad people to get a hold of guns. I don't know what your black market looks like, but I mean, how difficult is it for somebody who really wants to get a weapon to get a hold of one?
From what I know, it's possible because we do get news outlets that show that someone who shouldn't have one had a gun. The criminal circuit every now and then takes care of someone, but that's not a drive-by or something where if 6 people suddenly have automatic guns and they're shooting from the car, and that never happens here. What we do get is small handguns that do get used to just walk up to someone, shoot them, but mostly that's criminals taking care of each other. That's when we see that.
Okay.
Um,
Or
the,
self-defense
the
code.
instances where the public has them, almost never.
Okay, so, and I'm trying not to lose viewers here, but I am of the opinion, and even saying this as an American, the reason why our founding fathers gave us the right to bear arms was to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm of the opinion, in a sort of jocular fashion, that the only reason why China and Russia hasn't invaded the United States already is because of the entire southern half of the nation being armed to the teeth. They would not just have to fight the military; they would literally have to fight for every single inch of ground. But so would the United States government if, for some reason, our glorious Führer decided he wanted to deport all the blacks to Africa, or deport all the browns back to Mexico, because everybody with brown skin is from Mexico, apparently, according to him.
Throw them over the wall, and
exactly. We're back in hypothetical land. We as a nation, we as a people, we as American citizens have the right to defend ourselves, even against unlawful arrest. If you kill somebody, or if you kill a police officer, or you injure a police officer and he was illegally attempting to arrest you or rob you of your freedoms, there was precedent. Oh God, I know I need to have this date memorized, but I'm this just came to my head as an example. There was a man, I want to say in Philadelphia, somewhere on the East Coast, who was an attorney, and he had been framed by he was actually a defense attorney, and he wasn't able to help his client get out of jail, and so they put a hit on him and blah blah blah. They should make a movie about it. I'm really gonna have to find the story. Anyway, so he was framed, and he had to defend himself, and he ended up severely injuring a police officer before he could actually communicate his situation to them, and I'm fairly sure that police officer died. But we have a right to defend ourselves against unlawful arrest and against tyranny under the Constitution. So I'm under the belief that assuming you are able to pass a background check, assuming you have no criminal record, assuming you are able to pass your psychological check, if you're able to get a gun license, I think it should be as difficult as possible to acquire one. But assuming you can get one, you should be able to get, a tac vest, a grenade launcher for all I care. I mean, you're an American citizen. You should have access to every bit of firepower that a SWAT team or riot police or militarized police should the worst happen and our government be taken over. And I would be very interested to hear your opinions, giving the tenable nature, because to me the biggest problem with a small government is the
security.
You think that it would be fast for the United States to become corrupt. That the smaller a nation is, in my opinion, the easier it would be to corrupt it with like a coup d'etat or something like that. So your opinions?
I'd say if you're talking about the gun thing, I know that I think who was the one that had the biggest influence there last? Jim Jeffries had a massive impact with you guys.
The comedian.
Oh yeah, him. And he's going around here because we have Netflix too. And the idea was that he said, well, if you're going against the government and the whole tyrannical government thing, it's an argument that gets put up a lot, but it doesn't really go anymore. And I might be angering some of your viewers, but not here. Because the whole idea is you are literally bringing guns to a drone fight. And they have a lot more than just a few guns to do that. So the whole tyrannical government thing, I do want people to be able to go against their leaders if they have to, but we've got measures for that too. So, and the odds of them actually coming out and killing us, we still have allies that would come in and just take them over if they had to.
So being a part of the EU, you feel is a safeguard
Yeah.
to the a tyrannical. So see, I feel like you're taking comfort, or you're taking refuge in the power of a larger organization or a larger nation.
I am.
So would that not, in a sense,
go against my main point?
Yeah, just a little bit. I don't mean to.
I was waiting for that one because that was the one logical point where I thought you were going to attack me. But the idea is, as I said in the beginning, there are definite benefits to working together with other countries and to form like a bigger alliance. Yes. But there's a difference between forming an alliance like the EU at this point, or just forming them all under one
and making
government.
the nation larger. So
exactly.
Okay.
Because one government is also one set of rules, and you have some nation governed policies, as far as I know. But the big part is just covering the entire U.S. for a lot of the rules and regulations that you guys have, and with a lot of them, there is no option to change them in state to state, let's say.
Right. Well, okay, there is an option. There is a process. It's just the process by which a law gets passed is so thorough that it is inefficient. In almost a Soviet Union sort of sense. And I will comment against our own government. Russia has gone through several evolutions, and while they're not anywhere close to, or I hope they're not anywhere close to a final form, I hope they're still able to evolve and update and, in a sense, westernize or liberalize. I know, right? Their values. I mean, they have come a long way since, the Battle of Stalingrad, where, I forget if it was Stalin or Lenin, but basically his response to Hitler's invasion was, "You sorely underestimate how many bodies I'm willing to throw at you." So from that to what we have now, or what we see now, is at least a somewhat democratic process, if not, a mannequin of it. I feel as though there might be some benefit to what you're saying, but again, it goes back to almost like a who watches the watchman sort of sense, which is why I have such a huge respect for the original American checks and balances system. The judiciary checks the executive, the executive checks the Senate and whatnot, and so it's all circular and it's efficient. But in a small government sense, and I know I use Russia as a poor example for this. I'm trying to make this as defensible as possible. Well, let me take a different tack, actually. Let me bring up future technology, because, like I said, Russia and America they're totally different in age, but as far as innovation and evolution, one of the reasons why they've been major powers is not only their size, but their adaptability as nations. One of those has been through the adaptability of industry, and, like you mentioned, the hard decisions of the leaders. But that caused a huge amount of suffering, as opposed to in the United States, there wasn't a lot of hard decisions that needed to be made because there was such a democratic process, and there was less suffering but at the same time we lagged. Whereas Russia was really good historically at evolving and adapting quickly. So with the advent of technology, and I don't know how much you're fascinated by artificial intelligence,
Oh, a
but
lot.
great. So this is going to be an interesting close to the conversation, where we speculate the future. With AI becoming a thing, I predict that it will be an integrated part of our society and will, in fact, revolutionize, if not substitute, the process of governments or the roles of politicians, or might with the internet and with AI. Each voice will be able to be heard, and representation will be almost a primitive sort of government. And this is just me speculating here. But in that sense, with AI coming on, if these large nations are able to utilize them properly, I see them doing nothing but expanding, and I see the smaller nations eventually folding and just integrating themselves into the whole. So, I mean, I don't see the United States dissolving into its own 50 different nations, and I don't see it giving up any of its colonies. In fact, the more we see technology developing, and the more we see the EU and the UN gaining more power and authority, the more I'm predicting that governments and nations will merge instead of sector themselves. How do you see the future moving forward? Do you see the Netherlands being the Netherlands, or do you see an actual united Europe?
No, I think, and I desperately hope that we stick with the countries that we have, and that we don't start to unite more under the EU. Because
Russia should join the EU?
oh, hell no, no.
Okay. Why is that?
We have certain. We're also battling with Turkey because they've had a request open for joining the EU for years.
Mm-hmm.
But we keep saying that as long as you don't act like the rest of us and act in accordance with the standards that we set for the EU, then you're not coming in. And the way he's treating his people over there, and the way he's monitoring the propaganda he's pulling out, and all the stunts he's pulling to get reelected, and everything that seems shady to us and to a lot of European nations, he's just not getting in. So we're trying to repair the trading agreements that we have with them, because just because we don't like their government doesn't mean we should screw over every company in there or our own. But we're trying to repair that, as far as I know, and it's a whole big thing here for years. But Russia is a bit too much out there, and we have the plane crash that we're dealing with Russia.
The
because
Malaysian flight? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the what's it called? MH317, if I'm correct, or something like that. I keep forgetting the plane number, but it's the one that went down where Russia got blamed for shooting it down, and it happened about, if I'm saying this correctly, 5 or 6 years ago. But I feel the desperate need to Google that.
Yeah, I feel like that was the Malaysian flight.
Yeah.
Crimean rebels or something.
Yeah.
Used a Russian missile defense system that they were
Yeah.
given by the Russians, so it wasn't actually Russia, but
yeah, and they're still working on that,
supplied,
and
and
there's still research
Okay.
going on into what happened there, and Russia was shady at that part, but also the way that they're treating America, the way that they're being blamed for messing with your elections and stuff like that. I don't see them entering the EU anytime soon, and I don't think they want to, because I think they'd want for it to be one big Russia instead of them entering into something else and sacrificing Russia to be part of the EU. I think neither party will do that. But I also don't think we will actually become one Europe, as in like the US is. Mostly because you see a lot of the countries going against that. because there are different norms and values and regulations that we hold dear in those countries. And even Belgium and the Netherlands have a big difference.
Right, right.
And if you look at education, we are massively different from the other ones. Luckily, we're on top, but still. And I'm happily enough to work for one of the institutes that I can say that we're on top, so I'm safe. But if you look at education, traffic, health, and all that, it's not equal everywhere. And if you look at the differences, we would have to unite quite a bit there to make that work. And either everyone else has to get up to the highest standard, or they all stick to their own. And some of them have, let's say, less of a tax contribution to health because they think, let us keep more of our money because we don't need this. And I think that's the main part in a government that is the main cause of trouble. You pay for certain things that collectively you think are important and should be taken care of.
Right.
You're not going to all individually per household pay the people that are repairing your roads just to get that done. So you're going to collectively put it into a pot and pay the stuff that you all want anyway.
Exactly.
And,
but
yeah.
But at the same sense, that is all predictive. And so that's not necessarily 100% accurate. It's predictive based on several factors, based on what the company projects certain things will cost, based on what certain economists predict about the future, based on what certain sociologists and psychologists predict about the future and trends. And then also there's the accuracy with which, opinion is polled. Some people, I know, just offhand, the same people will answer a question a certain way before and after they've been fed. So just something as simple as having a meal in your stomach can affect your opinion on something when you're polled. Forget about the time of day, forget about whether or not they've just dealt with a death or they're experiencing some type of hormonal disruption.
How did you ask the question? How did you get to them in the first place?
Exactly. So with the advent of AI, with not only more advanced predictive technologies, but with also, there's going to be algorithms. There already are algorithms, but they're not going to just be used by advertising companies to know you better than yourself, but also by governments and by individuals. They're going to be able to manipulate these algorithms to where they can better themselves, or they can start taking that algorithm. But it's not because they know themselves better. It's because the AI knows you better than yourself, and you just start listening to the AI. So in that sense,
that last point I would fight you on, because the idea is that we use the algorithm to predict a lot of things. We're also using it now, and it's been a massive thing for the past few days here. Cops use those algorithms to recognize the make, model, and the amount of people inside a car to start predicting whether something dangerous might happen at a certain location. So it's more facial recognition, car recognition, stuff like that happens a lot here. Also for your fines, we're not happy about that, but it's for safety as well. So I think AI will be used for that. But I think most of the people are too afraid of something like that taking over. And I wouldn't necessarily say that they're stupid enough to believe in Skynet and the idea of a Hollywood movie. But I think they're too afraid of something that they don't really thoroughly understand taking over that much of our lives.
But the thing is that it already has taken over our lives to a certain extent, in an economic and in an entertainment sense. We all now have personalized ads, and we can thank cookies for that, which is a data processing system is built on artificial intelligence algorithms that are specifically designed to read everything you say, everything you post, everything you like on Instagram, every single rant you make, every single political photo you share. That is all tracked, and that becomes your identity. According to an AI program. And we've set up a societal reward system based on feeding this AI data about you. So, as willing as you are to fight me on that, I really think that it's going to be an interactive part of our lives in a sense that it does know us better than we know ourselves. Because this is just the information that we give it access to.
I mean, I can only imagine what metadata, if we feed all the metadata of one nation into an AI supercomputer, it's going to be able to, figure out what your daily schedule is, figure out what everybody's daily schedule on that nation is, and then we just put that AI in charge of regulating traffic lights. And we figure out, and that AI's job is to predict based on your alarm times, based on your messages, based on how much time you spend on Facebook in the morning, what time you're going to walk out the door, what time everybody in the nation is going to walk out the door, how long it's going to take them to work, and regulate traffic based on maximum efficiency. That's something that people who are working on autonomous driving are already trying to speculate on. So what's to say that that's not going to be applied to our voting system and just have an AI program that says, it's okay, I've got your vote. We got you covered. I know who you're going to vote for before you know it.
I have a question about this because I'm not sure about the cookie laws that you guys have compared to ours. So if you go to a website nowadays, is it just that they alert you to the fact that there are cookies being installed and used, or do you have some kind of an option?
You don't have an option to disable cookies
We do.
Well, okay, so a lot of times like on your cell phone you can, like if you know how to do it you can, but the average Joe doesn't know how to disable cookies.
Well,
and that's
I can tell you something new then, which might be an idea. We get, when we enter a new website, we get a screen, and it's been elaborated on since I think last year. We get the option. This is what we use the cookies for. Would you allow us to do that? Do you want personalized advertising?
And you have the option to
do you want a good website, which is what they always advertise. If you want a good website, we need cookies.
Right.
But there's always the option to say no, even to certain parts of it. So you can decide which cookies you accept, and otherwise you just still get the website. They just don't get the information.
So since the whole Cambridge Analytica thing and the whole election this cycle or last cycle, America has woken up to the idea of cookies and metadata and personalized ads and what that actually means about your personal information. So you see companies like Facebook, just Zuckerberg's companies, because he was on trial. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. These companies have started to get more transparent as far as the fact that they put ads. They had, I think, for a week on Facebook, there was just some snippets about how to fix it. But it was a long and complex process. You basically, like I said, the average Joe, he's not going to do that. And so what you have now is, instead of that message that you guys have, which is simply yes or no option, we have banners on that'll say, by continuing to use this website, you acknowledge that you agree to our cookies and privacy policy. And just simply by scrolling down, that scroll is the website's equivalent of you checking that I agree policy.
We had that.
Yeah, they don't make it convenient. They don't make it easy at all. But
we had the same thing. We had the same thing.
But then they made it more, well, yeah. So that's what we have to deal with. But again, like, and this is the American in me who values privacy, but the futurist in me who values our progression as a species. This private information, no, it's not the American in me that values privacy has a good point about this, and the fact is, these algorithms in our nation, we don't trust the people who are in control of them. That's the problem. They're not using it for our benefit, and so that's why we don't trust them. But in a nation like the Netherlands, you guys seem to have a pretty honest, open, and effective relationship with your government. So I guess that might be easier for you guys to put more trust in AI. Even though I hear you sharing some skepticism about it being used in government, which I'm sensing a bit of a duality there. Can you maybe touch on that?
I'd say we are definitely using AI for a lot of things when it helps us, but when it starts making decisions for us instead of giving us, this is what I think the best suggestion is. So it's giving you ideas instead of deciding for you.
Mm.
That's, I think, where you draw the line.
So that's your
So
line
we
in the
use
sand.
it to, yeah, exactly. We use it to give us an idea. Okay, this might be a good idea. Let's take a look. And then we take a look ourselves and we see, well, is that a logical thing for us? And does it work the way that it's now being presented?
So autonomous driving?
I think we're holding back on that a little bit because we see people getting hit by them.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Take the trolley
Yeah.
problem. An AI when it's driving you down the road, an AI can't present you with the trolley problem and pause time and say, here's the ideas. What are we going to do?
I think artificial driving will not take up that much. I think at some point it'll probably start working, but I think a lot of people just like to have that little bit of control, and the people that cannot drive themselves, I think that's the bigger market there.
Well, I would actually say that the benefit of autonomous driving, it will only be seen once it is encapsulated in the whole driving system. I mean, the only I don't know if you saw the latest interview with Elon Musk. He was on the Joe Rogan. It was so funny.
Everyone saw that.
But everyone saw him taking a toke. Nobody, I doubt many people watched. It was 2 hours and 45 minutes of sheer brilliance. But something he mentioned is the only time that his autonomous driving system has had a malfunction that caused harm is when a human being tried to interfere with it, or when there was a human factor involved. So his argument, along with many of the other arguments when it comes to the autonomous drivers, is that human error is more than machine error, and that when you maximize machine usage on the road or within any system, the more mechanization or the more programming that is put into it, and the less human interaction or altercation with that with any situation, the better. And so, I mean, I'm not trying to push for AI government. I'm not trying to say let's heil the robots, but in a sense, I still feel like the ideas of an AI based administrative system, like I'm not saying
inventing human error, or
sort of like as the firewall, or the guiding force. We would still have people to maintain the system. We would still need custodians.
But they would be in charge of a lot of things, wouldn't they? And then there's programmers, hackers, and all that kind of thing. And would you actually trust them with that much?
Well, I mean, we already trust our governments with that much.
Yeah, but they're not driving my car. I'm still doing that. So there are things that I have control over, and the government actually doesn't have that much control over my life, at least not here. So I'm also not worried that at some point some cop is going to come up and arrest me. They've tried. And I drove my mom's Mercedes for a few times, and I was too young for that. So they stopped me and they said, well, what's a guy like you doing with a Mercedes like that? And once you explain that and you just cooperate for a little bit, they don't drag you out of the car. They don't say step out for a moment. They just come to your window, ask you a few questions, and if you answer them, and if you really get violent, they'll pull you out. But they don't even ask you to turn off the car. They ask you to turn down the window and talk to them for a bit, and that's about it. If they find something, then they start asking you to come over to their car, because they usually have footage of you doing something shitty. Or something like that. Then you can watch the video in their car, and then if I have a traffic violation, that's what happens. They just say, well, if you don't believe me, come back. We have you on video. We have measurements of you, and come and look. And that's what they use as evidence. But I'm not worried about a lot of things that Americans are apparently worried about, because we don't have that many cop problems. And if we do, some kid is always videotaping it. It ends up on YouTube. Then 2 days later, the full version of that comes into a video because they showed you the part where it went wrong for the police. And then someone shows you the full video, and then suddenly it ends up not being a big problem. So we have far less issues here than what I see in movies and news in other countries. And I feel extremely safe here, even if I go out at night with no protection whatsoever. Mm-hmm. I would just sit down here on the grass on the side of the road and fall asleep, and I'd wake up in the morning. There's just nothing that we have to worry about for safety reasons. And if it does, let's give you an example. There was a guy that walked in with a gun, turned out to be fake in the end, but no one tested that. He walked into our main news station, demanded to get a camera and to be able to tell the people his big news. And he was supposedly from the group Anonymous, the hacker group. Mm-hmm. And he was supposed to come and be a whistleblower for a lot of things. And that was a terrorist threat, as far as they called it afterwards. What happened is that some guy just said, I'll give you a camera, put him in some basement room with a camera in there, and just walked out to say, I'm going to get you a cup of coffee, and got the police. So that's our version of a terrorist threat in the Netherlands. It's just, yeah, I don't know why. I don't think we piss off enough people to get a terrorist threat. So yeah, I think that's a massive thing. We just don't piss people off that much. And
oh, wow.
America and Trump, he has managed to piss off so many people in a few years.
Well, I'm not going to defend Trump, but I will defend the presidency. It's quite a long track record that our nation has of screwing over other nations, both militarily, economically, and basically in every other sense. So I get what you're saying in that regard.
Yeah, and the jokes about what was it a few months ago? There was a planet that was supposedly almost entirely existent of oil, and then the first meme that I saw in 5 minutes after that news feed was someone posted that picture with a caption that said, "When's America going to invade this planet?" That's it, yeah. Or when's it going to liberate the people on that planet? That kind of thing. So yeah, you just have a reputation in the world, and you know that. But yeah.
So let's get into that, though, because America has a driver. We're a consumer nation, and we are a militarized nation. We have a military industrial complex, and it's basically like the glutton at the restaurant who happens to be the richest person at the restaurant, and so he orders all the food. It's kind of like an avalanche cycle. We're stuck in this avalanche of consumerism and militarization. You guys don't have to deal with that at all.
No.
We
have a military. I've had friends who were in there, who were trained there. I went there. I actually thought
to ask, how strong is your military? What do you guys?
We're not that big, but we're everywhere.
Are you even a nuclear power?
No, we're not.
There you go.
So, yeah. But the idea is that if you start thinking about that, and my main idea when people were freaking out, even here, about Trump nuking Kim Jong-un and him nuking you guys and everything, that there's a certain thing called self-preservation, which kept me from worrying about any one of the two, because they both know the second they hit that button and someone says, the nukes are up in the air, the other one's going to do the exact same thing and you destroy each other. What's the use? So I think at some point everyone was massively afraid of one of the two pissing the other one off and saying, well, I'm going to bomb you before you bomb me. But it takes a while for those things to actually get there, and that's enough time for them to fire their version. And I think
missile defense systems and whatnot.
Yeah, but then still, you're going to have such a massive problem. Would any of those two actually have started that, or was it just basically a cockfight? And I'm insulting two very, very strong people here, but yeah.
No, I have no problem agreeing with you there. That was a mine's bigger, I can piss farther sort of thing.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to the size of a government versus its ability to maintain its structure, its integrity, its transparency with its population, and also to maintain the profit versus happiness margin.
Mhm.
I feel like you guys do a lot to provide opportunity for the people within your nation, but I don't see your nation having a lot of opportunity itself. And I mean, please correct me on that, but I mean, like, as far as a world presence, I don't see the Netherlands expanding its influence. I know you just said that you guys have a minor military presence, but I mean economically speaking. You know, let's take China for example. They've invested almost half a trillion dollars into just South Africa. And there's 52 other nations in Africa. And China is closing in on that continent. You know, do you guys have any Netherlands-based you know, companies? I mean, Shell's it's in the Netherlands, but that's an American company. Do you guys have any?
Wait, is Shell an actual American company?
I'm about 80% sure. I can pull that up really quick. I might be dead wrong. That's entirely possible.
As far as I know, I think at least then a lot of Dutch people are wrong as well, because we keep mentioning it as a Dutch company and originally from here. But yeah,
Is Shell Oil is the United States-based wholly owned subsidiary of Royal Dutch Shell,
there we go.
transitional corporation oil major of Anglo-Dutch origins, which is among the highest oil companies in the world. No way. But
Yeah.
U.S. headquarters. Huh. Royal Dutch Shell.
Yep.
Well, that's interesting. I stand corrected. Okay. So you guys do have an oil industry.
We do.
And that is your oil industry.
Yeah, I think we have a large tech industry in general, because if you look at water control and damming and well, we have our dikes, and that's something else than an American dike. But the idea is, we have.
I know what you meant. I know what you meant.
Yeah. I had to put that one in.
No, that
But
was fine.
the idea is that as far as water control, we are technically 90% of our landmass seems to be below sea
Below
level.
sea level, right?
Yeah, so we have that. We have a lot of technology. We have some of the most well-known, well-developed tech companies, tech universities, apparently in Europe at least. And we keep winning awards for those things and for the technology we use to protect ourselves from being flooded completely.
Okay, so do you feel like that's a result of your geography or a result of your government?
Yeah, I think so.
I really feel that's more of a geographic consequence. Like, I mean, if you guys were located in a giant field, if that was all the Netherlands was, I mean, you guys would be famous for agricultural technology.
Probably. But I think the idea is also the education part, because if you look at our educational system, every single person has the ability to go anywhere between preschool and the university PhD. So money-wise, that's never going to be an issue. Everyone has the access to those things, and it's not like I think your average yearly tuition is $10,000 at a university.
Yeah, it's I'm drowning in student loan debt right now.
Yeah, so the idea is our students are now paying, from what I heard from the new system that went in this year, my new first year students now told me that they were paying $1,000 for the first year. After that, for the next 3, it's $2,000 each year. And we also have a system where they get the money for that. They have to pay it back in some ways after that, but let's be honest, I have student loans left from when I studied. The rule is that I had 2 years after my last graduation from my bachelor and master. After my master's, I had 2 years where nothing happens. After that, I start paying, I think it's 12% of what I make over $1,500 a month. So from what I make over that number, 12% of that is my maximum, which I have to pay back. And then you pay back for like 20 years. And actually, until the system I was in, after 20 years or 25 years, if something's still left, which it won't be in my case, then it's just gone. So it won't keep saving up until you actually start making some money. If you can only pay back like 15 a month with that thing, then for 20 years you're paying 15 euros, which also means you're not making much money. So I kept saying the same thing with taxes. I hope I have to pay a lot of taxes because it means my salary is massive. But then, yeah, that's kind of the idea for us. And the educational part, having the education there for every single person who wants to go into the university, and makes it through our high school version of university. So there's a level thing there. But as soon as you make it through there, you're in. The money will not be an issue.
This goes back to the numbers thing. This goes back.
Yeah, I think the tax system comes in again, because then you can have a lot of transparency. You know exactly where the money is going, and you can make sure it gets spent where it needs to be spent. And
so lower population, higher taxes, more efficient system.
Yeah, I think the transparency is one of the main key points, and the fact that the government, if they do something shady, they are out so freaking fast that yeah.
But that's where AI comes in for me, in that sense. Like the AI isn't going to lie about numbers. It's going to and this is what I jokingly say to my little brother. He went through his communism phase, and I would say, yeah, communism is great, except humans are part of the endeavor, and you can't factor out human greed. But AI, assuming it's programmed, with total neutrality, it's going to give you whatever result is best for everybody, if you apply it in a sense. So I really don't see the size of the nation impacting its efficiency given the advent of AI. Now, obviously, now I think I'll have to say that you have officially, to a large degree, convinced me. Congratulations, everybody. Yes,
thank you.
I don't know what the viewers are going to think. I'm sure we'll have a lot of debate.
Please be kind. Yeah.
but as far as the future goes, and we're not on an episode of Futurist Forum, but I do believe that smaller nations will have a much harder time surviving, unless they can shelter themselves under the blanket of a larger organization. And
do you really think that the bigger ones like America and Russia are actually going to attack at some point and find a way to invade?
Oh, no.
Now have.
No, I think that with the advent of technology, I think that the idea of an invasion is primitive. It's not going to happen. The last time the United States invaded a nation was in the Middle East, and we still haven't left, and it's still a nightmare. It's still a mess, and there's still talks. We're probably not going to pull out for the next 10 years. We may never pull out. I don't know, but it's a disaster, and it was a testament to the rest of the world that one nation invading another nation is no longer an option. And so it becomes about immigration. It becomes about economic authority. It becomes about political influence. It becomes about, and in the age of technology, it becomes about propaganda. It becomes about data, and what information is being shared and promulgated amongst the people. So in a sense, the larger of an institution you have, the more control you have. And I know that you were arguing the exact opposite point, but given the advent of the technology that we're going to be seeing, I mean, and I have a really hard time defending the NSA here, because the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI all had the Boston bomber, the Pulse shooter, the Oklahoma bomber. They all knew this guy existed, and they did nothing preventative. But I don't necessarily feel that those cases were a result, the lack of action was a result of the size of our nation. I think it was a result.
That's too easy to say. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I think it's a result of the massive amount of legalese and I guess securities that we have as American citizens. If you're an American citizen, you have the right to privacy, and so that
same right was extended to those shooters and to the bombers. So in a sense, I guess the small government, the benefit in that is the lack of privacy. But again, I just have a really hard time coping with the lack of privacy from small government, or from
I'd say the lack of privacy sounds like a massive problem, but for you, where does the smaller government idea turn into a lack of privacy then?
Well, so take it this way.
In a large net, and this is the problem that I have with the NSA,
With the large net, the metadata, we're letting a lot of people slip through the net. But I also take comfort in that because I get to slip through the net. You know, I don't.
I'm not like an international arms dealer, or, like a drug dealer or anything, sex trafficker or whatnot. But at the same time, I don't want. I have radical ideas about the future. I disagree strongly with my current government, and I do have a legitimate fear. I call him the Fuhrer jokingly, but I've read the Nuremberg trials. I've studied World War II. I make Germany great again was Hitler's campaign slogan when he ran for Chancellor of Germany in 1934. Like, I'm able to pick up patterns and see futures and be scared. So this is where my fear comes from of a strong. Whenever I think of small, I think I don't think of less powerful. I think of condensed power, and that's where my huge issue is.
I think it might actually be the other way around, because what is the nation that gets seen as the most powerful one? It's not us. That's you guys. So you guys have a reputation for at least calling yourself.
Right, but our government is the laughing joke of the world right now.
Yeah, you are. Yeah,
we are corrupt. We are full of corrupt politicians. We're full of corrupt lobbyists. We have an inefficient government, and that's because one would argue that's because it's so large. Because there's so much. There's a pyramid scheme of representation, and there's corruption at every step.
And the connection to the people themselves is less and less and less with every layer.
Right. Yeah. And I get that. So that's an advantage and a disadvantage in this, in some sense. It's an advantage if you fear your government and you don't trust them and you don't want them to be strong because you legitimately live in fear that they're going to rob you of all your freedoms if they become strong and solid. But if you have trust in your government, if you have a good education system, a good welfare system, and your nation produces people of good character and people of integrity who are willing to, I'm not gonna bash our nation. You guys do have better technological development, better education system, better societal welfare. I mean, you guys are on fire right now. Not really. We're on fire right now, literally. So I mean, yes, you have convinced me to a certain extent, but I don't see us as a nation being able to apply the benefits of small government to such a large nation. I don't see any feasible way that we can try and have an honest relationship with our politicians.
It would mean breaking up and actually letting go of the whole United States of America, literally, and having every state become its own country. And
I think that's what it
takes. It's really a difficult topic because a lot of Americans think it's going amazing and they love it over there. And if I see movies, if I see interviews, if I see Jimmy Kimmel, stuff like that, that's the view we get. So it's whatever you guys release into the world that we can look up on the internet. That's the view we get of America. Plus Facebook, where every American is basically telling us everything they think about America on posts and pages that are made there, or at least run there. But I don't think it's going to work because you'd have to break up something which is gonna make people even more nervous, because what the hell's gonna happen after my state becomes a separate state?
Exactly.
And then it's gonna be a fear thing. And yeah, but it doesn't negate the fact that if you would do it, it might end up being more efficient, better, and it might make you happier in the end, because you get to go to the state where you think this is the setup I like. And that's the main thing of small groups. You get to decide with those people what's the setup that we all agree on. And the smaller the number, the easier it is to unite them all under one rule or one set of rules.
So that's, I guess that's the biggest issue that I have with your argument, is when you set up small, dense communities, you encourage isolationism and you encourage tribalism and that sort of thing. And while that might be extremely beneficial for the tribe, for the group, and consolidation is strength, I get that. That's always been a fact. But that doesn't unite us as a species. That doesn't help us tackle the world's problems, because the problems that each individual nation is facing is no longer a problem that only that nation faces. You know, so that's, I guess, the one thing for me that I really can't square. I guess.
But wouldn't that then be the same as what the EU is doing here?
In what sense?
So that the European Union, it exists. It's sort of like the United States, but we don't have the general government thing. So every single one of us has their own government. We come together, we talk about what we should do, because as the Netherlands, look at a map. If we start doing something about green energy, what the fuck is that going to do? Oh wait, it's America. I didn't say fuck. But the idea is that if you look at cooperation between countries, cooperation between tribes, perfectly well. But once you get back to your own country, once you get back to your home, you run that, and you run the environment and the people in there the way you see fit. And then once something happens, once something bad happens, once you need some extra help, once you need some advice, you go back to the group again, and you start talking to everyone and say, well, who can help me? Anyone have any ideas? Did you already solve this somewhere? Let me hear what you have. Right. But that doesn't require the united government idea. No, and that's where I think it's failing.
I'm all about that, and that makes sense. But at the same time, the
federal government supersedes any of the states' governments. And that's the reason why, with the whole legalization of cannabis laws, it's a huge issue in the United States, because half the states have done it, the other half haven't. And the federal government still is the whole while profiting off of the war on drugs. Yeah. But turning that into, okay, let me I guess mention briefly. I think it was called Catalonia. Is that province in Spain that was trying to declare independence? Yeah. And I actually spoke with somebody from Catalonia at my day job, and she says that Catalonia is the breadwinner for Spain, and their taxes are highest, and they receive the least benefits. And that's the whole reason why they wanted to leave Spain. They wanted to be their own nation, so that way they could have their own GDP and they could profit from their own taxes. So in a sense, and I'm not arguing for lower taxes. I'm arguing for honest,
efficient use of
efficient use of taxes. And so that to me is an example of how even in a small nation, you can have wild uses, disproportionate allocation of funds. So is that really a problem of big governments, or is that just something that is a problem of, let's say, because I mean, it's not the fault of the poorer part of Spain that that their economy is crumbling, but they're all still a part of Spain. So, the national, like you mentioned, the purpose of a nation is to establish, the values and the norms and the norm is we want everybody who's a part of this nation to be at a certain level of happiness, and so we're going to contribute some of our comfort and happiness to the other part of the nation in order to assure that the group stays happy. I mean, that there's always going to be minorities, and so I just feel like in a condensed government, you have the issue of the minorities not being spoken for. And I know you said specifically in the Netherlands, you guys have this accusation of corruption, and once that card is thrown on the table, then basically that's the end of that accused person's career, unless they can prove beyond a doubt that they're not corrupt. But I mean, that's not in every nation, though, right? That's something pretty much exclusive to the Netherlands. So is the argument necessarily for all large governments to be partitioned off, or is it more for the practices and the principles of the policies of the Netherlands to be implemented elsewhere? And how do you see a large government being able to do that without
disbanding
size? Yeah. Is there any hope? Help me, Obi-Wan.
Oh, I love Star Wars. Good move. I'd say my argument can be strengthened a little bit more that it's not the only thing you need to do. As if you make a country smaller, it's not the only thing that's going to magically help. But I think if you look at everything you'd need to become as happy as the countries that are apparently at the top of the list, which Spain isn't, then there's a few things that you need to take care of as well as the size of the country. But I think it's the size of the country that makes those measures easier to implement. Okay. And having the transparency in the government, and especially the texting, which everyone is pissed off about, because I also don't like handing in half my paycheck, or a little bit more than a third, to some guy over in The Hague and letting them figure out what they want to do with it. Because of those TV shows we know that sometimes they spend our money on shit that shouldn't be dealt with.
Right, but generally speaking, you trust those guys at The Hague to put your money where it's going to benefit you and benefit everybody.
Yeah, but we have a lot of people looking at what they're doing, and the transparency is meant for, okay, there's always someone, even if it's some kind of TV show, a talk show, the other parties, because we have more parties than you could possibly imagine, and anyone with enough, I think you need like 40, 50,000 people behind you to get a new party going, and then you could be on the voting ballot next year. So there's a lot of different small parties in there. But they're all kind of hoping for more. So they're looking at what the other ones are doing, who are actually now in charge of everything. They keep looking at that. They have access to that. And as soon as they do something shitty or even slightly less efficient, they'll be telling everyone. They'll be mentioning it in the next public debate, and it's on TV, and then it's on social media. And then they're trying to get everyone behind it, saying, this was a very shitty deal. Do you know what's happening to your tax money? And so we get a lot of information about that. And that transparency is easier. I think it's easier when you're covering less people and you don't have to reach that many people who then also have to go voting, who also have to know what it's about, because without education, you can hear all of that and not get half of it. Yeah. And I think that's the whole cycle that gets things going. And it might be possible with bigger countries. It's just going to be hard as hell.
More time consuming.
Yeah.
And more resource consuming. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I'm just trying to win here. But
no, I mean, like I said, it's
you've largely convinced me in a sense. I'm still gonna have to hold on to my certain aspects about privacy and freedom, while also holding the dual belief that AI is eventually gonna rule us all.
It's interesting to you mentioned earlier data pools, and how you can pool, how the EU can pool different data from different nations and see what's going on. I mean, eventually, I do see AI pooling all government data and figuring out which one is best for us. I don't know
Are they going to give access to a different country's AI, or do you think somehow they're going to steal it from each other?
God, that's honestly, I foresee it starting with the EU. I foresee it being shared information. I foresee it being shared AI. But for example, let's just take the opioid crisis. There's been a war on drugs in America since Nixon started it. And that hasn't been the only place that the war on drugs has happened. There's two countries in particular, the Philippines and Portugal, that come to mind. In the Philippines, their dictator Duterte or something like that, he has criminalized it to the point where it's punishable by death, and he encourages citizens to report or arrest or even execute drug users. And the Philippines is now having one of the largest drug problems in the world right now. Whereas Portugal, I want to say about a decade ago, did the same thing, and they used to be number 5 on the list of the country with the biggest drug addiction problem. And then they totally changed it. They turned things around. What they did was they decriminalized all drugs, cannabis to crack, and they took all. I mean, it's crazy. I wouldn't think that would be a good solution. But what they did was they took all the resources and they put it, what they were putting towards warring against drugs and criminality, they put towards rehabilitation, regulation, taxation programs. They privatized the industry, and they took over it, and then they treated it like it was a health problem and not like a crime problem. And immediately the problem solved itself. Within 5 years, the 50% of the population that was addicted to drugs had been rehabilitated. So in that sense, America's inefficiency of using other nations for pooling data is rather stark, because in my opinion, human beings, we're all members of Homo sapiens sapiens. We all have the same basic needs, desires, and fears, relatively speaking. And so we all respond to certain things the same way. And governments, in my belief, I don't know if you'd agree with me on this one, are great societal experiments that humanity participates in over a long period of time. And history is the data, but we also have live data. And I'm sure that if we pool our information, that we would have a more efficient problem-solving sort of system. And so that's why I see the benefit of big governments, because it's difficult to share information between governments. It's very difficult to have transparency. Whether it be technological sharing, education sharing, or just basic goods. There's always red tape that has to be cut through, and so a nation shares with itself much better than nations share with each other. However,
goes for any group, yeah.
Yeah, I do still see the EU being the first one to share its AI data. But I mean, we share economic data all the time, so it doesn't seem to me to be such a huge leap. And again, AI is going in my opinion, lead to a general tendency of larger governments, because it's just going to be more efficient for the AI.
Yeah, but I think the main point here is there's a lot of economic benefit here, and there's a lot of most of the time they talk about stuff like this, it is economical. But I think you're never gonna have, let's say, if you're trying to unite governments and you're trying to create this global human race, which biologically, yes, societally, oh, that's not a word, but you get the idea. If you're talking about societies and groups and what a group values, you're never going to find one set that's going to take care of everyone in there and it's going to make everyone happy. I really don't see that happening.
So the blind architect experiment, you don't take any truck with that?
I'm trying to remember what that completely was before I say something that in detail gets me screwed.
I forgot who. I think it was like a Robert something. But the idea is you put somebody in charge of creating a society, but you
but you inform them before they start designing the society that they're going to be placed in that society, and they will have no idea where their place in said society will be. And the experiment shows that when they're informed that, then the equality of said society tends to be as efficient as possible. You don't find slavery in a society where somebody is creating it blindfolded, for example.
Oh yeah, true.
Because that person doesn't know if they're going to be placed into that society as a slave.
True.
So I mean, do you feel that that's
I think certain issues might easily be covered because of that. Because yeah, you're not going to create something where half the population is overpowering the other half if you don't know which half you're going to end up in.
right.
But I think that's dealing with a few main issues, and something like that does not cover everything. I think there are way too many things that are up to, well, not the individual, but certain groups. And there are too many differences between people. And I hope that'll always be there, because it's the one thing I like about humans. If we were all like me, I'd kill myself. And every version of me that I can get my hand on before it happens. But I think that's the idea. That's the beauty of the human race. We do have something in common that every one of us has: DNA and certain basic needs.
Right.
But
And genetically speaking, as far as like virus resilience, variety is good, and variety is the spice of life. But I really feel like, I mean, America is a melting pot, albeit a melting pot of racism and ignorance and zealotry right now, but it is a melting pot.
Yeah.
And we celebrate each other's differences. That's part of what
Well,
makes
some of you do. And I might be a little bit far away, but I get the idea that there are a lot of people in America and in the USA specifically that do not agree with all of that. And a lot of you do, especially that. But there's so many of you. And if I have to guess as a Dutch person, I'm guessing South. But if there's a lot of people in those nations, in the states, in areas where politics might not venture that often. Let's keep it subtle.
Yeah.
That there are a lot of people living somewhere in those nations, in every single state probably, that do not agree with what's happening, and they would rather see a different set. And that's the whole point. If you can give them their area, and if you can give them a set where you can say, you get that area, you do whatever you think is right, but we'll take that. And if you try to come in with your shitty rules in our territory, go away. Okay, and don't shoot them immediately, but yeah.
Right. Okay. But let's just establish that there are some things that are ubiquitous across societies that are harmful towards a species.
Yeah.
Slavery. Obviously, owning another human being as property is immoral, regardless of what government is in effect. And that, I mean, that's a cheap one. Subjugation of women, that shouldn't be a thing. I mean, people shouldn't be treated less based on their skin color or who they decide to have sex with or whatnot. Exactly. So these sorts of things are still heatedly debated and contended in government. So I do feel like that large government sharing, in a sense, there is a certain baseline. Now, I don't know if you said you teach neuroscience, so I don't know if you know who Sam Harris is, but he wrote a book called The Moral Landscape, and he talks about peaks and valleys, but there being a general sea level, a general baseline by which all human morality stems from. And I think if we can look at everything objectively, then we'll get to that. But I just don't see that happening in an isolatory sense with nations. I see a nation that isolates itself, refining and perfecting its own value system and forming something truly great. And I see the value in that. But I also see the dangers in that. And so that's the potentials for dangers. Clearly, the Netherlands is not North Korea.
Thank you.
But at the same time, North Korea is also a small government. with
Oh,
a
yeah.
with a, it's not a monarchy, it's a theocracy. It's as far as I know, Kim Jong-un is actually still the president of North Korea. His
Yeah.
son is just the head of the party. So I think Christopher Hitchens calls it a mausolocracy, or something. But so that's where my fear comes from. But
Yeah.
again, Pete, I do think you have, to a degree, convinced me. So congratulations. And
Thank you.
I think we've reached the end of our session. I do want to have another session with you in regards to your studies on the prison system and the differences between nations and how they treat their prisoners, how we as a species treat those who do not feel like they can gel within society, and how do we address those people who truly cannot. Pete, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you.
It really was, yeah.
This has been great. I appreciate the knowledge sharing experience. I hope all of our viewers have enjoyed what you brought to the table as much as I have. It's been a very, very pleasant.
I wasn't the only one here, so give yourself a little bit of credit here.
Thank you very much. All right, and thank you very much, viewers, for tuning in. This has been our first episode of Convince Me. Thanks, Pete, again, and we'll see you guys next time.
We will.
Okay, I just